Do you think love is just something that happens or it's a skill to be learned? Now, I'll explain the question a little bit more because, of course, we love people in our lives. We can love humans. We can love the connection we have with someone. We can love our parents. We can love our sister or family and relatives. But it also, I feel like, is a skill to be learned because everybody wants to be loved differently and loves differently. And then we go into the conversation of like love languages. And I think it's really important to actually learn how to love people the way they want to be loved and to learn how to love ourselves enough that we can express how we want to be loved. And I think it's really interesting when you hear that thing that people say where it's like, if he wanted to, he would. But maybe that person's idea of how they were loved and how they show love is different than how you think someone just should automatically do things. I think it's really interesting to be like, well, I love someone in this way, so I just assume and expect that they would also consider those things. And I think that doesn't get us anywhere. That gets us into trouble thinking that this person's not doing it, or just having expectations sets us up for being disappointed. And as soon as we go to expect things in relationships, we can often leave disappointed and feeling hurt because we just expect that they love us that same way that we love, and it's not. And that can turn into a whole different realm of feelings in our body that may not actually be, they're true for you, but may not be the whole truth, if that makes sense. Now, where I've realized this is in my own relationship, in about year two, we really got to this point where I was confused because he was doing a lot of things for me, but I wasn't feeling loved in the ways I wanted, which led me to actually have to learn what that looked like for myself. And then also doing that quick little 5-minute love languages quiz, but also taking that a step deeper. How do we actually implement this in our lives? And knowing that like over time it may change and just being more verbal with that. So for example, I use my relationship. My partner's not as much of an affectionate or words of affirmation, but they're very much acts of service. I then learning, I am very much words of affirmation and quality time. So it would come to where he was really big with like making me tea and making me meals. And I'm like, oh, I love this. It's so nice to be cared for in this way. But if I wasn't getting those little words of affirmation and quality time and affection, I, regardless of how much he was doing all those other things and loving me in that way, I was still feeling like something was just missing. I wasn't getting the needs met. And then I see this happening in relationships where men are like, I'm providing so much and it's still not enough. And I think this is that missing piece, is knowing how we want to be loved enough that we can express it to the other person, and it not being a personal thing about them. It's not about them. It's about you and your needs. And I think it's really interesting when you hear this because all I see in those moments is like there's been a miscommunication. And often we're like, I've said it, but again, it's miscommunication because obviously how we have said it, if this person deeply loves and cares for you, would it not be right to assume that they want to do the things that make you feel loved? So would it not be right to assume that if they're not doing those things, it's not out of them being evil or malicious or being rude, then maybe they just haven't understood what you need to feel loved in that way, in a way that's actually like approachable for them. So back to this experience, I was like, oh yeah, you're doing all these things. And he's like, I'm loving you in the way he likes to show love. And then it got to this point, went to the love languages, and I was like, no matter how much you cook for me and give me tea, thank you. I appreciate it. Like, that's how you want to love me in those ways too, but just know that how I love to be loved is I feel it more when you just touch my back when you walk by. When you walk by and give me a kiss on the head, or when you set time aside to have quality time with me, or affirm how you feel about me. Now, these, because he gave his love in acts of service, and that's also how he liked love, this was a new thing for him. And for me, it worked out easy because he likes acts of service, and that's an easier one to get behind, where I find the emotional and verbal can be really hard. And that's where we can also be like, well, you know how I feel. I don't need to say that. I'm uncomfortable doing that. And it often stops there. But if we're in a relationship and we want to make the person we're with feel loved and seen, it is worth it for us to learn how that can happen. And it's a growth moment. It may not be in your comfort zone, doesn't mean you can't learn. It's not comfortable because you haven't done it, doesn't mean it's not for you. It's just an area of growth for you. Which, how wonderful in these relationships when we come to these moments that we can actually lean into growth with each other and this uncomfortable, messy middle that we get to be in with each other. Because closeness forms after these moments of coming to a head when you're like, something's kind of off here. What's going on? Can we figure this out before we just like opt out or think it's not for me? Because trust me, my mind has went there. Is this relationship just not for me? He's great in all these ways, but something is still missing. And then it took getting clear in myself to know, what do I want to be loved? What actually really makes me feel loved? How can I do all of those things for myself? Because that's a slippery slope if we outsource all of that. But then know it enough inside that I can clearly ask for what I need or clearly state in this conversation, because it became a point where we were like, let's teamwork on this and figure it out. What's going on here? And then for him, no matter how much I rub his back, want to love him in those ways, tell him all these things, he also feels love through acts of service and quality time. So for him, we kind of got nitty gritty where it's like, what are those things that make you feel really loved and considered? For him, it's, you know what, when I come home after a long day and the dishwasher's done, that made him feel loved. And I was like, oh, yeah, say less. So regardless of how much I showed him love in the ways I wanted, he may still be feeling left like, oh, darn. And it'd be so subtle. This stuff is so subtle that I think it's pushed under the rug until it's too big. Like I said, this was year roughly like 2 or 3 we got to this. It was able to go by until we hit this point, and it's so easy to be like, oh, I guess is this the end? We're just not seeing eye to eye. I'll find somebody who loves me better. Or if he wanted to, he would. I actually need to be clear with explaining what I want in order for him to do it. And we can't expect them to just do it if they wanted to, because his way of showing love and receiving love is different. That is okay. That's just based on their upbringing. And if they're willing to learn and be open to hearing you out, and by willing to learn, also willing to try. I think that's a really important point to say, is a willingness is action. You can be willing verbally and you can say that, but if there's not follow through or effort with that willingness, it's not willingness. It's just bullshit that you're saying. Anyone can say they're willing to do things, but if there's not action following through with it, it's just cheap talk. So in that, there was effort. So we actually got down, and I had some people be like, oh man, they don't really love you if you need a note on the fridge. And I'm like, no, we're learning to love each other in the ways we want to be loved and show love. And that's different. So we put notes on the fridge. What does that look like? For me, it's, hey, touch me when you go through the kitchen. When you get home, if you rub my shoulder and give me a little love, I feel thought of. It's so simple. It's so simple to me. It wasn't so simple to him, and vice versa. So these little things that we can communicate, that we have to first figure out in ourselves and then clearly communicate and made sure it's heard on the other side. Because I think sometimes as well, we'll communicate and we're like, yeah, it's so clear. But the way we've communicated it, or maybe even how they heard it, because that's through their own perception, may have not been quite aligned. So when we actually wrote notes and had them on the fridge of like these few things, I knew I was loving him in a way that made him feel good without questioning. And then also because it was a topic of conversation, we could come and be like, you know what? I feel like I know you've been busy, but you haven't made the effort to just love me in the way I want this week. And it allows the person, right? Like, you can say that. They may have an overwhelmed week, but it's coming from a place where it's like, I know you're doing your best, but here's how I'm feeling. And then being clear with what you need. So we had a little note on the fridge that was like, for him, it was doing the dishwasher. And I was like, easy. If I can do that, that's just a subtle thing that makes him feel considered and cared about. Okay, awesome. For me, it was those little back rubs. I also like notes, him as well. That was like a big thing. So it's like trying to leave little notes here and there. And I can't remember the other ones now because we're on year 7. So that was way in the beginning. But this has been such a key thing because it comes up now in moments when he's like, oh, I've just been so busy. Like, I'm sorry I'm not loving you as much in the ways I know you want. Or there's this acknowledgement of the elephant in the room that we can bring up instead of it being the subtle thing that just builds this resentment, this anger that can then lash out and be like, I feel like you don't care for me, all these things. It can be clear and it can be communicated. And it's that skill of how to love people. And I realize even in my friendships now this year where I'm having it as more of a priority, I'm like, how do my friends want to be loved? How do I want to be loved by my friends? And this is a really uncomfortable thing because, yeah, relationships have actually been an area where I haven't had as much, like, I've had struggle and I've been through it, but I've learned quicker in it. Friendships, I have a bit more struggle and it takes me a bit more time to learn and it's a little bit more uncomfortable. Where leaning into that this year, how do my friends want to be loved? Because I'm realizing for some, their expectations of what friendship looks like is different than mine. And before in the past, I'd be like, whoa, that's way too much. And now I'm seeing it as like, how can I learn here? I value this friend and I value this friendship. So I want to make them feel loved in the ways that they want to be loved. What does that look like? Because I think even in that, we all have different expectations. And then realizing there's like some growth moments there. So I think love is more something to be learned. Yes, it's a feeling, but just a feeling does not carry us through hardship and long term. That part is a skill, and to be well loved. Because when you are seen, you are loved. And some people are really good at just seeing and observing. Others may not. But if we always expect others to love us in the ways that we want, if we've never said it, we are setting ourselves up for failure. So, yes, it's something to be felt. I think it's also a skill that we can always be getting better at. But, like I said, in small moments throughout this it starts with getting clear with what that is in me, and then learning how to give it to myself, and then being able to ask for it in a way. Now, being able to give it ourselves, oftentimes I feel like I'm lacking things from him when I'm lacking things in the relationship with myself. That is a whole other topic I will get into in another video. So, thank you for being here. Let me know if it resonates. And do you think love is something to just be felt, or do you feel it's a skill? Is that totally off? How do you feel about it? Because I think it's different for everybody's experience. So I'd love to know more on how this has played out in your life, in your relationships.